Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Audit Committee held this afternoon via remote video link. And I would like to express a warm welcome to Councillor Jackson, and very pleased to see you joining the committee, Councillor Jackson, and thank you. So that takes us on to the roll call, being item 1, and I'm going to ask Tom Clark if he would like to do the roll call and also explain the meaning and of the virtual meeting and the explanation thereof. And we're also welcoming, of course, the management team and the Office of the Democratic Service, internal and new external auditors. Mr. Clark, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Boutrup.
Present.
Councillor Cornish.
Present.
Councillor Hicks.
Present.
Councillor Jackson.
Present.
Councillor Porfer.
Present.
And Councillor Stockwell.
Present.
I understand that Councillor Cromie has already sent apologies. In connection with the virtual meeting, we're meeting virtually given the high COVID rates we currently have. Fortunately, they have come down this week, but they are still historically high. And we're now at about 72% of the adult population in Mid Sussex having received the second vaccination. So there's a way to go on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. So that will take us then on to item 3. And the normal process, which I'm sure Councillor Jackson is well aware of, that if we're going to use the hand indications to see if anybody has, and that's under chat and reactions, if anybody's looking for there to raise the hand. And that being so, I'm going to ask under item 3, are there any declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on this agenda? And I'm looking for any hands now. Thank you. I see no hands, so I'm going to assume that there are none, and thank you. Then on to item 5, to consider any items the Chairman agrees to take as urgent business. I have none. So that's going to take us on to item 6. And this,
Excuse me, Chairman, I think you've forgotten the minutes.
oh, I have indeed. Thank you very much indeed, because in fact there was a correction to those. Thank you very much, Councillor Stockwell. Yes, to approve the minutes, but may I just suggest we need to reword on the minutes of the meeting on Tuesday, the 2nd of March. And we're looking at, for those who've got the full copies, page 6, and the paragraph which begins the head of corporate resources, etc. And there were items in there concerning local authorities and lending to parish councils. I did discuss this yesterday with Peter Stewart, and I think, Peter, we agreed that that probably crept in from an aside rather than being pertinent to the meeting. Do you agree, and shall we alter it?
Yes, Chairman, we did discuss that. I think you're right. It does seem rather out of context, and that last sentence could be deleted without detriment to the minutes.
Thank you, Peter. That being so, with that alteration, can I ask for agreement to the minutes of, let's just get the date again, of the 2nd of March, which we have just discussed, and also for the 28th of April, 2021. Again, do I have agreement for those? Again, it's raising that. Thank you very much. And Councillor Jackson wasn't there, so of course he cannot subscribe to that. So effectively, for those who are present, that's unanimous. Thank you. And that takes us then on to item 6, which is the annual governance statement. which effectively we're being looked to consider and receive. But Peter Stewart is going to introduce this item. Peter, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is actually the first time the Audit Committee has been asked to look at the annual governance statement. We are trying to move the committee, and you'll find this later in the year if the appropriate constitutional working party agrees, that the committee moves to an audit and governance committee. Now, as part of that, you would then oversee the risk management and governance of the authority, as well as the usual reports you receive now. That would be entirely in line with the SIP for guidance. But as a start to that, and because it's pertinent to our timing in the year, the annual governance statement is here for you today to have a look at. You'd usually see it anyway as part of the annual financial statements, but the guidance is that you see it as a separate item, as a discrete item, and give it your attention just as an item on its own. And as you'll appreciate, the purpose of the annual governance statement is to set out the governance arrangements for the authority. It does that in a fairly straightforward manner, I think. And also, one feature of the statement is that at the end of the statement there should be a discussion, if you like, about any arrangements that have fallen short or where improvements could be made. And you'll see in this year there are two. One is around the actual governance, funny enough, of the authority itself. So a report, as you know, has been commissioned, and you've all seen that report, and there's an action plan that sits with it, which is going to be a piece of work for you to take forward over the rest of the year. I'll just flick through the rest of the report here. There we are. And of course, the other issue where the full range of governance has been exercised during the year is around the decision to close Clare Hall, which, as you know, was subject to a call-in, a judicial review, where the council then agreed to reconsider its decision. So this is mentioned here because it's obviously a significant governance issue for the year. It would be remiss not to mention it. However, there's nothing that the committee actually needs to do as part of that, simply to note that that's happened during the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I invite committee members to make any comments or to ask questions. Councillor Cornish, I see that your hand is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask how, so if a governance kind of statement, if you like, is added to the structure of the audit committee, is that if they're just to be noted, I just wondered what is the framework, if you like, in terms of how it's discussed and what the outcomes are of that, because does that kind of link with standards? I'm just not quite sure how what's the relevance, if you like, in terms of, you know, taking those kind of discussions forward. Is it because they kind of link to the financial capacity of the council? I just wonder if you could provide a bit more explanation as to why that decision has been taken. Thank you.
Peter, I'm sure you'd like to reply to that.
I will try and reply about that. I suppose the first thing to say is that whilst you've seen the annual governance statement before as part of the financial statements, the rest of what I said there hasn't actually been enacted. You haven't become an authority looking at risk management just yet. Committee looking at risk management just yet. That may happen in the future. That is down to the constitutional review group to have a look at and agree that the purview, the overview of the committee is extended. The second thing is really, it is around, yes, it's around how are you doing your job to overview the financial statements? And does this help you to do that? It should give you reassurance that the authority is well run, and therefore, down the line, the financial statements can be relied upon. I think it goes further than simply noting. Although you're not a decision-making body, you can though ask the other committees to look into things. So if, for example, you were not happy with how, let's say, how the call-in system worked in this particular example, you would say to the Constitutional Review Group, we think you should look at that. It hasn't worked particularly well in this situation. If you were not happy, for example, with the governance report or how that was conducted and the action plan, you might also then say, we're not happy with that. We'd like somebody else to look at that. So your role is, as a committee, is very much one of overview rather than actually doing things. You're asked to make recommendations, if you feel appropriate, to other bodies to examine procedures and processes if you feel they're not up to scratch.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cornish, are you content with the answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bootrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just really a comment on page 14, paragraph 3. As you know, I'm the current chairman of the Scrutiny Committee for Customer Services, Service Delivery and Community, and it makes mention there of the fact that we've received the analysis of the complaints, which indeed we do. But I think it's also important to say that we have also, at the meeting in February 2021, requested a breakdown of the compliments that the council received, of which there are many. And I think because we felt that that also affords a learning opportunity as far as potential improvement of any governance arrangements. So I just wondered if perhaps that could be added in, that it's not just the complaints that are analysed, it is also the compliments going forward. Thank you.
Peter, would you like to comment on that? You're muted, Peter.
I'm switching between applications on one laptop, so it does get a bit confusing sometimes. Yes, exactly right. Actually, we should be making more of the analysis of compliments as well, because as you say, we can learn almost just as much from the compliments as we can from the complaints. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bootrop. Councillor Hicks.
Yes, Chairman. I welcome the review in terms of the governance review. Specifically of this committee, and I think it's timely in terms of to look at strategic risk and to have a committee of the council look at it rather than keep it, as I understand at the moment, within the cabinet. So I think that's an important area, as the events of the last year have illustrated, that should be reviewed. I note the existing terms of reference refer to the CIFA Code of Practice for Internal Audit in Local Government. So I suspect we could already do it within the existing terms of reference, but I'll leave that to your judgment. But I think it would be useful perhaps to review the CIFA guidelines on the role of the Audit Committee in terms of just highlighting any other areas that we need to look at in terms of the terms of reference. Perhaps if you could give us a link or something noting the actual document itself is at a substantial cost, but it'd be useful to have a summary. So I'd just commend it particularly to look at, for this committee to look at strategic risk and perhaps incorporating it within the work plan so that we do actually address it in this financial year. Thank you.
Peter, would you like to comment on that? Because you did comment earlier about risk being included at some stage in the future.
Yes, Chairman, that's right. And I will also ask Tom to make a comment as well about the Constitutional Review Group's sort of working arrangements. But yes, I mean, you're quite right, Councillor Hicks. the SIP for terms of reference. I will send those round. I do actually have a copy. You're right, they were £275, which seems a bit excessive, but I managed to get my hands on a free copy, which I'll send round to you all as members of the committee. We are how do I put this? There is more that this committee can do within those SIP terms of reference that we don't do right now. For whatever historical reason that was, I think we wanted to have a pure audit committee, but most committees now do the full range of duties set out in the SIP for guidance. So we are intending to bring that in, including strategic risk as well, as you say. Tom, perhaps you could comment on the chairman's permission on the timescales. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate
Yes,
that.
the Constitution Working Group is a formed working group. It is likely to meet in the autumn. It's waiting for the first phase of the governance work to be completed. And then what you have on page 16 of the governance letter gives us some framework to work with, in addition to the request from the committee to include the risk work in its area of activity. So whatever the Constitution Review Group comes up with then has to be approved by full council.
Thank you, Tom. And Councillor Hicks, I think you're content with those answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stockwell.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What I'd like to know is what format is this going to take within our committee meetings, and who is going to be the lead on it? Who's going to present it? Who's going to, what should I say? Well, basically lead on it. And how often are we going to see reports on governance from which we can, we can work and learn?
Peter, would you like to reply to Councillor Stockwell?
I will, Chairman. I mean, you'll appreciate we haven't actually agreed to do this yet, as the council needs to agree that. But Cabinet themselves receive 2 reports a year on strategic risk, one to if you like, set out what the risks are, and a second one mid-year to set out what they're doing about it. So they will still receive a risk report that says, here are the strategic risks, do you agree them? And then the committee will then, this committee will then overview them. I have to say, that it is, the minimum would be, I think, a 6-monthly, but if you felt that was worth doing more regularly, you'd certainly be within your rights to ask for that. The lead person reviewing those, my name appears on most of them right now. I think it'll be a combination of myself and perhaps Emma Sheridan, who's the business unit leader for Communities, Policy and Performance. So between us, we will be supplying the reports as you need them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And Councillor Stockwell, I think you're content with that answer too. I do not see any more hands up. And that being so, I'm going to come to the recommendations. And we're going to use the yes/no buttons as we're all now used to. And the recommendation is the committee is asked to consider and approve the AGS for the inclusion in the statement of accounts for years 2020/21. Please, if you would vote now. I've just been asked if I've just changed that wording slightly to ask to be to consider and receive rather than approve, because there's nothing for us to approve. And everybody's still ticks the box, so I think everybody is comfortable with that. Excellent. Thank you very much. We will move on to item 7. Again, Peter, if you'd like to introduce the internal audit annual report for 2021.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And you'll appreciate, members, that this would normally have this would normally be presented by the the head of internal audit, which in this case, in the last few years, has been Gillian Edwards from Crawley Borough Council under the auspices of the shared service. Now, you appreciate that there's a report later on, of course, there that sets out that that shared service arrangement has come to an end, and we have a new provider, and you'll meet them a little later. But this report was written by Gillian. If she were here now, she would be telling you that everything is in order. She's quite happy with the governance arrangements for the authority, and is quite happy for her name to be attached to a report that says that, and then external audit would rely on that that internal overview of the governance arrangements for their own reassurance on what's happening at Mid Sussex. So I think you can have confidence that governance arrangements at Mid Sussex are in order according to this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Perhaps you might also just like to comment on item 2.2, because there was an item of weakness which has been all addressed and agreed, but perhaps you might just like to share that with councillors. If you remember, Peter, it was the revenue and benefits.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just looking through my report. I see there's two paragraphs 2.2, isn't there?
I've only got one 2.2 on my page 17. And it's within the summary. If you remember, we discussed that yesterday. And simply put, it was an item in the revenue and benefits, which is all now being successfully looked at, organised and dispensed with.
That's right, Chairman, yes. Sorry for the delay.
No, that's all right. It's absolutely fine. So I'm now going to invite councillors to debate, discuss or ask questions on this item. So I'm looking for some hands to go up. Councillor Hicks, your hand is up.
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy with the review. I'm still confused about why it's 2021. It's a review of the previous year, and just termed the 2021 in terms of the title, presumably. But I just wondered, in terms of the reason for the change of auditors, is it just a financial, or just be interested to find out? Thank you.
Peter, I think you were going to come on to that later, but do you want to just give a short explanation now?
Yes. Oops. Yes, Chairman. Yes, we've changed auditors because if members remember, a gentleman by the name of Chris Bauer, who used to come along, and sometimes when Gillian wasn't here, he actually retired from Crawley. I think back in January, maybe March. Anyway, he retired from Crawley Borough Council after many years of service, and the people at Crawley decided it was, and he used to work almost whole time on our audits under the shared service. And I think they decided in the end there wasn't much point really in simply hiring another person at Crawley, simply to see them sort of wander over the horizon off to Mid Sussex and work. It wasn't really worth the overhead. So in the terms of reducing their head count, they decided that actually the shared service had probably run its course, and they would be just doing their own internal audits, and Mid Sussex should find another provider. Absolutely fine. I was absolutely fine with that. Crawley had been with us, I think, probably maybe 8 years, been running it. Prior to Crawley providing the shared service, we had actually been with the private sector. We've been in the private sector probably 12 years prior to that, with I think one provider, which is Haynes Watts, Chartered Accountants. So we were well used to having our internal audit provided by a variety of different providers. So now I'm very pleased, as we'll come on to meet our new colleagues with, I'm not quite sure how you say Mazars or Mazars, depends how one wants to say it. And I'm hoping we'll have a high degree of professionalism and maybe a slight change in reporting, you may see from our new colleagues, which started on the 1st of April 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for your question, Councillor Hicks, which then I think when we get to item 10, it will be a very much shorter explanation because Peter has made that introduction already, and thank you for Peter for that, but I thought it was just to clear away Councillor Hicks's question. Councillors, I do not see any more questions, so I'm going to move to the recommendation, and that is that the committee is asked to receive the report, and I would ask you again to, with your green things. Thank you, and I approve that too, and so that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. That brings us on to item 8, which is the review of the Treasury management activity for 2021. And Peter, it's into stage left again. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Right, this is a report you've all seen before in its formats. It is the review of the last year's Treasury management transactions. The first couple of pages sets it out very clearly, actually, that all transactions were within the policy you set, so everything's fine there. The only, I'll say, transgressions, probably too strong a word though, really, is where because of the pandemic, which was not over yet, but the money seems to have stopped flowing for now at least. Early on in the year 2021, we received, I think I mentioned this before, we have received big lumps of money. The biggest one was the first one, I think, in about the 10th of April. Some £26 million came in, and we had very little chance of placing that with counterparties and keeping it within our limits. I'm hoping that's a sort of once in a lifetime event, although not personally. It'd be nice to have that personally, but I think that was the only difficulty we've had, put it that way. It's a nice problem to have, but there were times during the year when we just could not place money with people. We can place it with the Debt Management Office. I think at one point, because they wanted us to have the money rather than them to have the money, they were actually offering negative interest rates. So if you go back to the government, they charged you for it, which is a bit unfair, really. But that's the way the country was. So other than that, all transactions were exactly in line with the policies you've set. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to invite councillors to comment, ask questions, and subsequent, if necessary, debate. So I'm looking for hands on the screen, and Councillor Hicks has raised his hand up. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. It's interesting in terms of problems with disposing of cash, as it were. And I notice in terms of the breakdown of investments that we have and the use of money market funds and the small amount in Lloyds Bank, and I just wondered if we have surplus funds, wouldn't the default be to put it in a mainstream bank like Lloyds rather than perhaps some of the money market funds? Noting particularly in terms of BlackRock and the 0% that is the interest rate determined here, and thinking, of course, that as my understanding, the money market funds would be the actual rate is at risk in terms of it's undetermined to some extent, and noting the BlackRock fund is currently showing a negative return for the year to the 30th of June. Just wonder that there's maybe specific risks relating to these funds as opposed to others. Whether we could have some comment on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Peter, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Chairman. I mean, you appreciate it's not my area of expertise, but the treasury management advice we had was to spread it around as much as we could. I don't think Lloyds could take the sort of money we were talking about at the time. I don't actually think that BlackRock offer nothing for the money either, actually. It does seem odd, doesn't it, that it's 0%. I'm not sure that's right. I'll need to check with Pamela, who's obviously not here, not on the call today. But I think the principle behind it is that even with the money market funds with very low interest rates, you are at least diversifying the cash amongst a lot of different people. So the risk of default is therefore lower than, say, a single bank. That's the theory behind it. But I will check the interest rates with Pamela.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. If I may.
Yes, you may.
Just so, presumably, though, that in terms of the larger banks like Lloyds, we would have a higher amount deposited in terms of the risk would be less. But is there a risk in terms of the money market funds in terms of the interest rate is not guaranteed?
Yes.
Is that right?
That's correct, Chairman. It's a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Not fixed.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Hicks, are you now content with the answers?
Okay.
You are. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much indeed. I'm looking for any other councillors who would like to ask questions, but at this minute, I see none. That being so, I spoke too hastily. Councillor Cornish.
Apologies, sorry. My question was slightly similar to Councillor Hicks, but it was on the interest on the investments. Would there be any change in strategy going forward? My notes have escaped me now. In terms of that investment policy, considering the I guess the state of play at the moment, or is that nothing that we would look at in the short term?
Peter, perhaps you'd like to comment?
Yes, I mean, we do discuss this sometimes because we're placing money with other local authorities. There is, not to put too fine a point in it, there is so much cash floating around because this is a cash investment. So you put your money in and X days later you get it back out again. You're not actually investing in a company or a product. You're just simply placing cash on deposit and taking it back again. But there's so much cash around there that placing money for, let's say, a year with, pick a name, London Borough of Sutton, let's say, you're probably going to get less than a quarter of 1%. It's almost not worth the transaction fees anymore to put the money out there. So we are, like many other authorities, really struggling to get our money away somewhere. Now, the only way, generally speaking, one gets a better return, because that's become the norm right now. And the only way one will get a better return than that is to assume more risk. I don't think, you tell me if I've got this wrong, but I don't think the authority in this committee is minded to accept more risk on its cash deposits. There's a possibility you could do that. You could go for people who offer more. There are people out there, but it would mean taking your certainty ratings down and assuming more risk. And I've always felt that you're not an authority, this is not an authority, and you're not a committee that wants to do that. But it certainly is a matter for discussion if one wants to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think we've resisted the temptation to go to Venezuela and Argentina at the minute. But Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. I note that some of these investments have either matured or are likely to mature. Have we any idea what sort of new interest rates we're likely to achieve and what effect this will have on our investment income?
It's good. Sorry, Chairman, shall I answer?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Thank you.
it's a good question because, of course, this is a 2021 review. So many things have happened since the end of March. And that is that actually the situation is exactly the same. There is so much cash around that when our investments are maturing at, say, 2%, we are then struggling to get that money out the door to anybody who's willing to pay more than, well, to find counterparties who need it is hard enough. But we're probably getting, I don't know, 1/10 of 1% these days. So yes, where our budget was something like £350,000 or whatever it was, I'd be surprised if we get 100,000 in the year now. And I don't see that situation changing very quickly, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Peter. And Councillor Jackson, I think you're content with the answer. Thank you. No, I don't see any more hands up. I'll just wait a couple of seconds. Councillor Stockwell, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a technical question, really, about how the fact that we're not getting the interest rates. We've got our funds spread around various entities. Where do we stand in terms of protection for those funds, like from the FCA or whoever, as you do with private money, where you're protected up to £85,000? I mean, where are we? Are we out of that sort of protection, or do we get anything at all?
Well, your protection really is the cut. Sorry, Chairman, I shouldn't come in without asking, but with your permission, I'll answer. The protection is really that you are dealing with, on the whole, with your local authority, because you're dealing with sovereign bodies, effectively. And then, of course, after that, you're dealing with AAA-rated people. So you've got no statutory protection, no. So you're using your professional knowledge and knowledge of our professional advisors to assist you in making those decisions. In fact, while you're asking your question, Councillor Stockwell, whilst I was listening, I've just popped up an email here from Pamela down at Ada Worthing, when she gave us some reports, and this is dated 20th of July. It's only last week. So we've had surplus funds to invest. We've not had any good offers from the local authorities through the brokers. However, Yorkshire Building Society is offering 0.09% for 1 year.
Ooh, big stuff.
You've got £4 million with them. I suggest an investment, £4 million counterparty limit. I suggest an investment of £3 million. I agreed. So £3 million for 1 year at an interest rate of 0.09%. And you have to ask yourself, is that really worth doing? It was the best offer. It was the best offer, and we've taken it. So these are interesting times for finance, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Peter. I think you were right when you were saying that you are at the vagrancies of the world when it comes to security, as we found out with Lehman Brothers, and because there was a lot of discussion about whether business customers had any protection. And I forget what the answer to that was, but I think it was none.
No.
So there we are. Now I'm looking to see whether there are any more questions. I'll just give it a couple of moments for councillors to contemplate. No, there are no more hands up. Therefore, I'm going to assume that everybody is content with Peter's presentation, and thank you. Therefore, I'm going to go to the recommendations, which is the committee is requested to note the contents of the report. And again, if you would use your green buttons so that we may adopt them, and that is unanimous. And thank you very much. That now brings us on to item 9, the external audit report. Now, there are two of the external auditors, Kevin Suter and Jack Dunkley, who've just come online. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Hope you're well. Now, who would like to take this forward?
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll start with a bit of an introduction and then I'll hand over to Jack for some of the details.
Thank you.
Okay, so yes, good evening, members. So we're here this evening presenting our usual audit planning report, in this case for the year ending the 31st of March 2021. So this is presented to you later than usual, which is due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. So last year, the committee members will hopefully recall that deadlines were moved backwards in the public sector, and there were difficulties experienced in auditing in the COVID environment, although not specifically at Mid-Sussex District Council. So we started our planning cycle later than normal, and we weren't able to bring our plan to your last committee meeting. The plan has also had to incorporate this year an assessment of a number of new areas, which we reflect on for both the work around the financial statements and our value for money responsibilities. So, however, we have now substantially finished our planning and we'll be looking to commence our year-end work shortly. So that's the sort of contextual introduction I just wanted to provide, and I'll hand over to Jack to just talk us through the key risks that we're focusing on in the performance of our audit.
Thanks, Kevin. So just to talk the committee through the risks that we've identified this year. So this starts on page 48. So the first risk we've identified is the risk of misstatement due to fraud or error. So it's a risk that we're required to recognise as part of ISA 240, and it's a risk that we recognise on all our audit engagements. So ISA 240, which is the accounting standard, sets out what our response should be to this risk, and we've listed those procedures on the page. Our next significant risk is then down on page 49. So again, this is a risk that we're required to consider as part of ISA 240. So ISA 240 presumes there's a risk of fraud in revenue recognition. And where we think that will manifest itself at the council is through the inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure. So again, it's a risk that we've recognised on the council for a number of years now. And again, we've listed out our procedures, which is essentially to test a larger sample of capital additions in year. Moving down to our third significant risk. Again, this relates to the risk of fraud in revenue recognition. But from this perspective, it's looking at the sales fees and charges grant income, which is new this year. So the way that this scheme works is that the council submits a return to central government, setting out the lost sales fees and charges income during the year. Central government will then reimburse the council for a set percentage of this loss. So where that scheme is potentially open to manipulation or error, and also is material, we've recognised that as a risk this year, and it's a risk that we've recognised across a number of our councils. And again, we set out our procedures, which is essentially looking at that return and validating some of the numbers that are in that return to gain sufficient assurance over it. Moving down to our next risk, which is on page 51. So this is the valuation of investment property. So investment property is a significant balance on the council's balance sheet. It's an estimate, so inherently subjective in nature. That estimate becomes more difficult due to the impact of COVID-19 on the market, as well as the ongoing structural changes we're seeing in the retail environment at the moment. So again, we recognise that as a significant risk this year, as we did in the previous year. And again, our procedures are listed on the page. The ones I highlight is the involvement of our own specialists to help us review that work. And then moving on to the areas of audit focus, which is down on page 52. So the first one we recognise is the pension liability valuation. So this is in a very similar fashion to the investment property valuation. Pension liability is a significant balance on the balance sheet. It's inherently complex and subjective. So again, we involve our own specialists to help us review this balance. The next area of audit focus is accounting for COVID business grants. So this is where the council has received funding from central government to then pay out to local businesses. Again, where this is a new material transaction stream in year, we recognise this as an area of audit focus. But the key consideration is whether the council is acting as a principal or an agent in those transactions. And then the last area of audit focus is around going concern and the changes to ISA 570. So ISA 570 is the auditing standard in relation to going concern. That's been revised this year to put more focus on us to challenge management's going concern assessment, as well as the disclosures in the financial statements. So again, we've recognised that as a risk this year. And then the last point I wanted to highlight in the report before I open up to questions is down on page 56. So this is the changes to the value for money requirement. So as in previous years, we're still required to consider whether the council has put in place proper arrangements to secure value for money. However, in previous years, we only need to report on an overall evaluation criteria. So where we would have a risk, that could be as simple as a line or a paragraph in our final report. That's changed this year. So instead of that overall evaluation criteria, we now have 3 specific reporting criteria that we need to report against, which again are listed on the page. For each of those criteria, we need to provide a commentary. So setting out the work that we've performed to gain sufficient assurance over those areas. So what that means in practice is when we come to report at year end, you'll see far more detail from us over the work that we've performed in this area compared to previous years. And then just the last thing I want to say on VFM is we've completed our initial planning on the work, and we haven't identified any significant risks. Yeah, and with that, kind of happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Jack. Luckily, all councillors have read the document in some detail, so I'm sure they were keeping up with you.
Sorry.
But suffice to say then, the rest of the document through to page 79, you no further comment on.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you very much. Councillors, over to you to ask any questions as you may see fit. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Chairman. Just in terms of COVID-19 and the risks around, I presume the audit will be largely done remotely again this year. Now, perhaps you could confirm, but I wonder if that second year running actually brings any risks, or whether you've reviewed how whether additional work might be required because of remote work. Okay.
I can confirm the audit will mostly be done remotely this year. We do have the option, if necessary, to be able to come back on site with the officers' agreement, but the plan is to undertake the work remotely. We don't believe that causes greater risk. We've adapted our procedures to ensure that we are undertaking those appropriately. So where we would previously look for hard copy documentation, as an example, we're looking to do that through screen sharing, through Zoom or Microsoft Teams, for example. So we can undertake alternative procedures such as that. We haven't identified in the course of our work any major changes to the control environment either that's implemented by the officers. So we haven't seen any increase in risk factors. But we will reserve the right, if we need to come back onto the site for any reason, to talk to the officers and do so if that's required during the audit.
Thank you. Councillor Hicks, I'm assuming that's adequate answer for you. Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a very comprehensive report, and I don't think it misses anything, to be perfectly honest. But there's just a couple of things I'd like to ask you about. Just make sure I've got the right ones here. Oh yes, the risk of fraud, that is on page 50. A couple of things that you've highlighted. The risk of fraud in revenue recognition, sales fees and charges. Is that to be a one-off this year? I'm looking at, because obviously this all adds to your costs, or the cost to us as a council. So is this something that will be ongoing, or is it just a one-off for this year because that is what the government has awarded us, if you like, or awarded councils in terms of the funds that we should be getting back? So that was one of them. And the valuation of investment property, yes, I remember from last year you had an issue with that. And so I'm wondering how this is, you're bringing in your own specialist to do that. Again, is this something you would do on an annual basis or a biannual basis, or how is that one going to work? And there was another one, just bear with me 2 secs. Again, oh yes, the COVID business grants. Again, is this a one-off for this coming year, following all the money that's come in and making sure it's all being properly accounted for, etc.? Because I don't see that. I'm not sure that's going to be an ongoing thing. Is that just, again, for this coming year? Thank you.
So if I take the first and the third question on the COVID grants together,
Yes.
From our understanding, currently, those grants are annual. So we're looking at them in this year. If they carry on next year, we may need to look at them again. If they don't, we can't look at them because they won't be in the accounts. So we'll have to see how the national picture plays out and assess that annually. But our current understanding is just a one-year thing. On investment properties, that is going to be annual. You have to value your investment properties on an annual basis, and that's a requirement of the accounting standard. And we're required to look at that as a very large figure within your accounts. It's also a significant focus of our regulators currently, and I expect on an ongoing basis to make sure we're doing sufficient work in that area. And with the new auditing standards that Jack mentioned, one of those is an increase in our expectations to undertake work on estimates, which has come in this year. So I would expect, if I were you, to be seeing that as an ongoing item within our audit plans.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Because as I say, it's a very comprehensive report, and I don't think you've missed very much, if anything at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stopcore. Kevin or Jack, you may say that my question is not quite appropriate for this meeting, but I was just going back to the pension fund liabilities, seeing as they are in the council's balance sheet. Are you content that the funding level is in good shape? In other words, it's funded to a very, if it's not fully funded, but it is funded to something you're comfortable with?
Well, we're in terms of Jack and I, we are not the auditors of the pension fund. So we, in this respect, we can only deal with making sure the numbers are correct in your accounts. So that would be a function of the auditor of the West Sussex County Council. That is EY, but it's one of my colleagues. And that would come through in terms of our reports on the pension fund audit annually. So I think that's the most appropriate way I can answer it.
Okay, and thank you. I'll just give a couple of seconds for councillors in case there are some late questions to come. I see no hands up. That being so, I'm going to go now then to the recommendation, is that the Audit Committee is asked to note the 220/21 annual audit plan, and as usual to vote with our buttons. And again, that's carried. Thank you very much. Now that is going to then bring us on to item 10. That's back to you, Peter, again, but you've done most of it, so presumably it's going to be quite a short commentary, but you may care to introduce the gentlemen who are, or there may be a lady there too, I can't see, who are actually going to who are going to do the business for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Graham and Juan. I'm not quite sure if you want to say Mazars or Mazars. I've been saying Mazars for years. I could be wrong.
It's a silent S, but either way is fine. I pronounce it different ways because I pick up dialects and when I speak to people. So either way is perfectly fine.
Fine. Okay. I'll adopt Mazar in future, I think. Yes, I haven't actually. The committee should be well, maybe just interested to know we've never actually met in person, of course, because the contract has been put together from a framework, and there's actually, because of COVID and because of business need, there's actually no need to meet these gentlemen, but they come highly recommended. They'll tell you themselves how many people they do the internal audit service for. We have spent some time, if you like, getting to know each other a little bit and setting the service up, but it's still, I should stress, it's early days. Work hasn't really started yet on the actual audits. We are, as your members will know, we tend to do most of our fundamental systems towards the latter part of the year, and there's actually some data that's been derived from those systems to actually look at as part of the system-based audit approach that is adopted these days. So I'm not quite sure who's going to talk, but Graham or Juan, please feel free to introduce yourselves at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'll kick off. Good evening, everyone. So yeah, my name is Graham Clark. So I'm a director with Mazars, and I lead on our internal audit services to local government, amongst other parts of the public services. So I'm responsible for about a team of 80 nationally. And a big part of what I do is working with local government and organisations such as yourself. And as Peter said, the service has been procured through the London Borough of Croydon framework, which is also called the Apex framework, and it's through that actually that we work with Worthing and Ador. So we provide a similar service there amongst many others. So myself and Juan, we also provide, if I describe it as a full service where we're the head of internal audit, we do that at Woking, for example. Probably my biggest client is Croydon, who I'm sure you might know all about as well. So yeah, we've got a lot of expertise in the local government space, and a sort of a very competent and able team. And through the framework, not only do we bring obviously the general internal audit side, but also specialist teams. So in areas of IT audit, for example, so where we do work around cyber or whatever it might be, we use specialists within the firm to do that work, and obviously other areas such as grants and other things. So we have a wide range of things we can bring. So that's me in a nutshell. Juan, would you like to briefly say a couple of introductory words for you?
Yes, thank you, Graham. So yeah, my name is Juan. I've joined the firm back in 2015, but I have around 9 years experience as an internal auditor. And the last 5 or 6 years have been entirely in local government. I joined the firm as an auditor with experience, and I've been in both sides of the audit, doing the field work, and in the past couple of years, managing clients. And as Graham said, one of the clients I manage is Woking Borough Council, and I'm also helping out the in-house team in Buckinghamshire Council. That's a bit of me.
Well, thank you very much. Peter, would you like to make any comment at all?
Well, I'm not sure I can add much more, really. This is more simply meant to be an introduction. As is our usual practice, the internal audit team will bring forward the reports in the usual sort of way. You might see some differences in the style of reporting. I'm hoping you won't see too much difference in terms of you won't see any difference really in the extent of reporting. Either we're asking Mazars to do pretty much the same kind of job that Crawley were doing, have done so well in the last few years. But, and this is quite important, I think, for internal auditors, they get a feel for a place after a while. And so you can imagine that after, say, 6 months or the first round of audits, they start to get their feet under the table and think about how things that could have been done or could be done differently in the future. And I think that I'd like to encourage that. So I think that's sort of innovation. We have been with the same internal audit shared service, as I said earlier, for some 9 years. It's entirely possible that things have become, this sounds disrespectful, it's not meant to be, but it's possible that things have become a bit comfy. And so a change of auditor actually is by no means a bad thing for an authority to go through. So I'm looking forward to working with Mazars and these two gentlemen. I hope the committee is also. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to invite any comment or questions from councillors, and there is one, Councillor Boutroff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just really to agree with what Peter has just said in terms of fresh eyes always bring a new perspective on things. And I think it is indeed a very healthy thing to change every so often, because those fresh eyes can pick up opportunities to improve things, and perhaps errors of where, that might have been overlooked. And again, no disrespect to Crawley, but fresh eyes do bring change normally. So I look forward to receiving the Mazars reports. That's all really.
And thank you. Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. And welcome, Graham and Juan. Very nice to meet you. So we're looking forward to your next reports whenever they're going to come. Just a quick question. Are you sort of picking up from our previous auditors, or do you have your own special way of doing things? And I wonder what the sort of format was. How much is it going to change from what we've been used to? I don't know if you've seen our previous ones, but I've been on this audit committee for quite a number of years now, so I've got rather used to a particular style. But that doesn't mean to say it's the best style. So you don't know what, as Councillor Bootstrap was saying, you know, things can, you've got a fresh pair of eyes, which is always good. So I just wondered how it was going to progress from here. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think it's probably, Peter probably said it, around incremental change. So obviously those sort of a fresh perspective through doing the work, and some practical maybe differences on the ground in terms of maybe our terms of reference document might look slightly different. But in terms of how we report to the committee, you know, at sort of a high level, it's generally pretty consistent with what we see elsewhere, to be honest. So we want to get to know the organisation, understand you, and I think, you know, we'll work. There'll be some incremental change this year, but actually work with you all and maybe suggest something if we feel there are areas that could be enhanced that would lead to a change. We'll certainly be bringing that to the attention of the committee and obviously discussing and agreeing that with you.
Thank you.
Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Chairman. We've just been discussing external audit and perhaps an increased emphasis on governance and value for money issues. I just wondered how much internal audit is maybe moving beyond risk and control to those factors.
Yeah, I mean, this year we've obviously there's been a plan that's been approved much earlier in the year, and again, as part of that sort of incremental challenge, I think, you know, we would agree that fundamental systems do need coverage. We've highlighted a couple of maybe other areas that we thought could be more tweaks this year in terms of it, but probably as we move into the next year planning, because obviously from our perspective, it's clearly important that internal audit is a risk-based approach. So actually, and it will tie in quite well, I think, with what we heard earlier around the potential constitutional changes coming here around risk management. So you should see, although you will always cover fundamental core systems as part of a plan, actually, I would expect to be able to demonstrate also an explicit link back to the key risks that face the council through the internal audit work, and then obviously through our work, you will get the comfort and assurance that we're looking at the key risks. You can see the controls are in operation, or if they're not, we're making recommendations. I think the other thing that maybe again that might come with, because we work with so many other local authorities as well, and we produce an annual publication called Horizon Scanning. So we look across the sector and what we think are the key risks, and that actually informs our planning, but we share it with all our local authority clients as well. And I will definitely, when that comes out around the autumn time, so that would be something again that I think will be really helpful to the committee in terms of you know, when you're receiving risk reports from Peter and the team, that, you know, that might well prompt some challenge or opportunities. And we do a number of other things, like something more relevant. We do like, because obviously with local elections, new audit committee members, we've done 2 webinars this year aimed at new committees, which are recorded. You could view them if you wanted to sort of remind yourselves, or if I think I heard there was one new member on the committee. So if you want to see where we take through what the theory is, and we have panel discussions. So we've had chairs from our clients take part in those panel discussions, again, which are quite interesting. So I think we can hopefully bring you know, best practice in sharing what others do as well as part of our approach. So hopefully you'll start to see that come through as we move through for the year in the programme.
Graham, thank you. Councillor Cornish, did I see your hand go up and come down again?
You did, but I have already had the question answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Wayne and Graham, welcome to Mid Sussex District Council. We look forward to working for you. I'm sure all councillors know that Mazars are a very substantial accounting auditing company and have been about many years. I have to just laugh though to say that it actually makes me feel my age, because once upon a time with your senior partner, I was seriously involved with some Lloyd's syndicate audits, which were all successfully completed, because if one syndicate fails, the entire Lloyd's audit fails. And when that was all signed off, I mean, there was a bit of wiping about, and if I remember, a spot of lunch, but I suspect that's not going to happen this year. Times have changed. So welcome to you, and we look forward to receiving your next reports. That being so, I'm going to ask the committee is recommended to agree the draft charter, and again to vote with our green buttons in the normal way. Everybody seems to be on board for that. So not only on board, but welcome aboard. And we look forward to hearing from you in due course. That's going to bring us on to item 11, which is the committee work for 21-22. Peter, do you want to run, or is it, no, Tom, it's you're going to bring this forward. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chairman. This is the provisional work programme for the rest of the year. Obviously, we've had discussions this evening about risk management, and so with the 1st of March, there may be a further item there. Subject to Council approving that additional responsibility for this committee. So the basic work is there, but there may be some additions going through the year.
Thank you, Tom. Have councillors got any questions on this programme? I'm not seeing any. On that basis, the recommendation is the committee to recommend the committee's work programme as set out in paragraph 5 of this report. So we're off to our buttons again. And that again is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. That brings us then to item 12, questions pursuant to Rule 10.2. I have none, and that being so, I am able to conclude this meeting at 18:07. I thank everybody for their attendance and wish you a very good evening. Thank you, councillors and officers.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
And it's nice to see you all.